Did the LA Kings just play their worst game of the season? We answer that question and more on this edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for the past 30 years. I'm also co-host of the Puck Podcast, a weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the last 18 years, and a passionate LA Kings fan for over 30 years. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Well, the LA Kings were back home for a mini two-game homestand, hosting the Pittsburgh Penguins, a team fighting to stay in the wild card hunt in the East. This was the Kings' first home game since the game against Calgary was postponed because of the terrible fires in Los Angeles. Kings had a very cool logo at center ice honoring the firefighters and had a special pregame ceremony with many of the firefighters themselves on the ice before the game. As for the lineup for the Kings in this game, it was the same lineup that we had seen in the last game, except for the goaltender. But the top line had Andre Kopitar centering Adrian Kempe and Alex Turcotte. The second line, Quentin Byfield with Tanner Jeannot and Warren Foegele. The third line, Philip Deneau with Kevin Fiala and Trevor Moore. And the fourth line was Trevor Lewis centering Samuel Helenius. And then the other forward was rotating amongst the other wingers with that 11-7 setup, 11 forwards and 7 defensemen. For the defense, you had Mike Anderson and Vladislav Gavrikov as the top pairing, Joel Edmondson and Brant Clark the second pairing, Jacob Moverara and Jordan Spence the third pairing, and Kyle Burrows was the extra defender. David Rittich was in net, the number 2 goaltender getting a start, while top netminder Darcy Kemper served as the backup. I actually liked this move going into the game. Rittich has been great on home ice and looked like this was a nice spot to get him in on some action with some big games coming up for the Kings, where you would think that Darcy Kemper would likely get most of the start. So the big question going into this game for me, how would the Kings rebound from a subpar performance to close out their 5-game road trip, a loss in Seattle, in their first home game back and an emotional night in LA? Well, the game summary in this one, unfortunately for the Kings, the Penguins were the much better team right from the start, much like the Kings' last game in Seattle. Pittsburgh would get the first power play chance of the game, and they would capitalize on it with a bit of puck luck as the puck was deflected on net, off a Kings stick, and in for the goal. Late in the period, Sidney Crosby, the star for Pittsburgh, would deflect a point shot in, and the Penguins had a 2-0 lead. The Kings' poor opening period for a second straight game, outshot by Pittsburgh in that first period, 12-6. But watching the game, it felt worse than that. Penguins would make it 3-0 on a Yevgeny Malkin goal with the Kings kind of scrambling around on their own end. LA would finally get on the board with a help of a 2-man advantage after a couple of Pittsburgh penalties. Adrian Kempe blasting in a one-timer to make it 3-1. Unfortunately for LA, they still had the power play after the 2-man advantage and could not capitalize on that. And then shortly thereafter, the all-important next goal of the game was scored by Pittsburgh on a tap-in right in front of the net to make it 4-1 after 2 periods. The game was pretty much decided at that point. Final period, pretty routine shot on net. Kings goaltender David Rittich made the pad save, but he didn't know where the puck was. It ended up behind him and then tapped in for the final goal of the game. 5-1 Pittsburgh, and that would be the final score. The Kings' 9-game home winning streak comes to an end with a dud of a game. Kings dropped to 25-14-5 of the season, with just their 3rd home regulation loss in 18 home games this season. As for the game stats in this one, the Kings were outshot by the Penguins, 32-26. Special teams goes to Pittsburgh. They were 1 for 1 on the power play. The Kings were 1 for 3, but the Kings' penalty kill needed to stand up against a pretty good power play for Pittsburgh and didn't get the job done. Face-offs favored Pittsburgh 31-27. Hits were in favor of the Kings 18-7. Block shots were even. Both teams had 14 apiece. So what was good for the Kings from a team standpoint in this one? I'm tempted to say nothing. The Kings did score a power play goal for a third straight game. And you would think, with how awful the Kings' power play has been, that you could look at that as a silver lining, but I don't think so. Only one of those three goals over the three games has been a kind of legit power play goal. That was the power play goal against Seattle, where the Kings actually won a face off of the zone, set it up, moved the puck around, and scored. The power play goal against Vancouver was on a 2-on-1, and the power play goal against Pittsburgh, they needed a two-man advantage to score. So maybe on paper, it looks like, okay, an encouraging sign for the Kings, 3 power play goals in 3 straight games. But I honestly don't feel, watching those 3 power play goals, like the Kings power play is now somehow on track. Maybe the team will feel a little bit different about it. Maybe they've got a little bit more confidence having scored 3 power play goals in 3 straight games. But I'll have to see more before I start to feel a little bit better about the Kings' terrible power play. Like I said, the circumstances around those 3 straight power play goals, not exactly your typical setup power play type goals. So we'll see. What was not good for the Kings from a team standpoint? I'm tempted to say everything. That's probably not fair, but the Kings didn't carry over any momentum from that strong third period they had in Seattle. Instead, they looked unenergetic, like we saw in the first 2 periods against the Kraken. Kings looked just a step slower than the Penguins throughout the game for some unknown reason. The Kings struggled to get any good scoring chances at all. Shots on goal were hard to come by, especially in that opening period, and that kind of set the tone for the game. The Kings' defense was shoddy, and the goaltending was subpar. The Kings have had games where they've played a bad period or two, like they did in Seattle, but at least in that game, they had a strong third period. It has been very rare, thankfully, this season that the Kings have not been good for an entire 3 periods. But unfortunately, that was the case, in my opinion. In the game against Pittsburgh, and head coach Jim Hiller seemed to agree with this comment afterwards as we check our coach's quote. Jim Hiller said, quote, "Disappointed, just disappointed, and on a night like tonight, I can tell you probably count maybe only 5 times I've been disappointed in our team this season. Tonight was one of them, maybe the most," end quote. So my big takeaway from this game, this one was a real surprise for me. The Kings have been so good on home ice all season. Frankly, playing against a mid-level Pittsburgh team that didn't have its leading goal scorer and had a goaltender in net that had 1 regulation road win all season. That's a bad loss. Was it the worst loss of the season? We'll look into that a little bit later. But big picture, should we hit some kind of a panic button right now? I would say no. But I will say this. The Kings have a really tough stretch of games coming up. And if they play anywhere close to the way they played the last 2 games, they're going to lose a lot of those games. So coming up on Wednesday, the next home game is against the defending Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers. I would expect to see the Kings with a much, much better effort, hopefully better execution, or else maybe we could start to get concerned in a hurry. Up next, we are going to check in on some individual players from the latest game against Pittsburgh. That is next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. The FanDuel app is easy to navigate and has a variety of bets that can keep you excited. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly, no waiting around for your winnings. Whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add some extra excitement for the playoffs, FanDuel has got you covered. We are down to the Final Four in the NFL. The Eagles are a 6.5-point home favorite against the Commanders in the NFC title game, while the Chiefs are a 1.5-point favorite at home against the Bills in the AFC Championship game. Just visit FanDuel.com, join today, and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, let's get to some individual players for the Kings and their 5-1 loss to the Penguins. And as always, we start with the goaltending. And unfortunately, this was not good for the Kings. It's been a strength pretty much all season, but not against Pittsburgh on Monday night. Big save David Riddick came into the game with an 8-1 home record. He had a goals against average under 2 on home ice. And in this one, he allowed 5 goals on 32 shots to drop to 11-10 overall. On the season, this was not a very good night for the Kings' number 2 netminder. First goal he allowed was a bad goal. Pittsburgh's on a power play. Kevin Hayes takes the puck strong to the net from the side of the net. And LA defenseman Joel Edmondson did poke the puck off of Hayes' stick, and it goes into the net, trickling in through David Riddick. But while that was a bit of bad luck, I guess you could say, Riddick has to have his post covered on that play. It doesn't matter whether Kevin Hayes shot it or whether Joel Edmondson deflected it on net. He has to have his body completely up against the post to make sure that no shots can get through him. And he didn't do that. That's 100% on David Riddick. That's a bad goal. The fact that it came off a teammate's stick actually is irrelevant. He has to have that post covered no matter what. Second goal was a shot from the point that Sidney Crosby deflected in. It bounced off the ice and into the net. That's not a soft goal, so I'll give Riddick credit on that one. That was a tough save to make. Third goal, a pass through the slot from the side, one side to the other. Riddick seemed to track it well, sliding from his right to his left, but it found a way through him. I won't go so far as to say that was a soft goal, but I did think it was a stoppable goal. And in that situation, you need your goaltender to make a save. You're down 2-0. The next goal is a huge goal, and he needed to make a save there, and he didn't. Fourth goal, right after the Kings score, a tap-in goal from close range, terrible defense to let the Penguins player skate right to the front of the net to get in position for that tap-in. But again, I thought Big Save Dave needed to make a big save at that point because the Kings had just scored. They had just gained a little bit of momentum. And again, it's not his fault. There's a player all alone in front of the net. But again, there's some times in a game where you just need your goalie to make a big save for you. And Rittich didn't, unfortunately. The fifth goal, the final goal, relatively routine shot on goal. It's in the pads of Riddick. It's under his pad, but he didn't know where it was. He couldn't feel it, apparently. He ended up kind of spinning around in his own crease. The puck then came out from underneath his pad and was sitting behind him in the crease, and the Pittsburgh player came in and just tapped it in. I've seen goalies in the past when they get in a situation like that, when they know the puck is under them, but they're not sure where it was, they'll kind of flop back on their backs and try and cover it up wherever it might be. But Rittich just kind of stood there and looked around in his feet like, where is it? And I would say that's a pretty bad goal as well. So is David Riddick solely to blame for this Kings loss? No, he didn't get any support offensively or from his defense. However, he didn't play well also. This was his worst home game of the season by far. So Big Save Dave did not come up with any big saves for the Kings in that loss. Adrian Kempe had the Kings' lone goal in this one on a 2-man advantage. He was set up with a shot from the right faceoff dot on a one-timer that goes off the post. The Kings were able to keep it in the zone, and then they just set him right up again for the exact same shot, and the second one went off the crossbar and into the net. That is 6 goals in the last 8 games for Adrian Kempe. He's got a goal in 3 straight, leading the Kings with 23 goals, leading the Kings with 43 points. He's on pace for 43 goals and 80 points, both of which would be new career highs for Adrian Kempe. And people like to talk a lot about overpaid players who are underperforming. Adrian Kempe is underpaid and is performing brilliantly. He makes $5.5 million per season. And yes, no one should be crying for a player making $5.5 million per season. But we're talking about within the context of professional sports in the NHL. And Adrian Kempe is tied with Philip Deneau for the 6th highest paid player on the Kings. He makes the same amount. He will make the same amount next season as well, as he's under contract for 1 more year. And then he will get a well-deserved raise, barring something very, very unforeseen. So Adrian Kempe getting it done this season, having a great year for the LA Kings, and certainly right now providing all the offense for an offensively challenged Kings team at the moment. I did want to point out Samuel Hellenius, the rookie forward, had a good scoring chance early on in the first period, something the Kings didn't have much of in the first period. And he got some playing time about halfway through the game, got promoted with Quentin Byfield and Warren Fogle on the second line. Saw 12 minutes and 28 seconds of ice time, the second most in a game in his young NHL career. And I thought a good job by Jim Hiller, especially in the third period. Every time I looked up, Samuel Hellenius seemed to be on the ice. Look, the game was pretty much over in the third period. Jim Hiller looking to make something positive out of a bad situation, and it was, let's get the young guys some ice time. And that's what he did with Samuel Hellenius. So good for Samuel to get some extra ice time in this one, and looked okay. Quentin Byfield had the best scoring chance of the game for the Kings. In the first period, he made a spectacular highlight move around a Penguins defender, moves in on net, and just shoots it wide. He had a couple of those kind of chances against Seattle. If he scores on that, it's a highlight reel goal that everyone's talking about. A dynamic move to get free, but the finish wasn't there. And unfortunately, that's been the case too many times with Q this season. And I'll just say what I said after the Seattle game. Hopefully for Quentin, keep doing it. Eventually, I hope it will start to go. And when it does, then we've got a dynamic player. But a great move, a highlight reel move, just could not finish, unfortunately. So a bit of a frustrating season for Quentin Byfield continuing. But again, getting those chances is something that I think is encouraging. Mikey Anderson and Vladislav Gavrikov. Second straight game, the Kings' dynamic defensive duo were both a -2. And they've been amazing together all season. But if that trend continues, then it's not going to be difficult to decide what to do when Drew Doughty comes back from his injury, which we've been talking about. What do you do with Gavrikov? Do you move him back to the second pairing? Do you maybe move Drew to the second pairing? Well, hopefully those two guys will get back on their game. But not a great couple of games for Mikey and Gabby. Checking some of the individual leaders from the game against Pittsburgh. Adrian Kempe, your only goal scorer. Andre Kopitar and Jordan Spence had your assists. The Kings, not surprisingly, had no plus players in this game. Quentin Byfield, Tanner Jeannot, Trevor Moore, Mikey Anderson, Brant Clark, Joel Edmondson, and Vladislav Gavrikov were all a -2. Adrian Kempe led the Kings with 6 shots on goal. Jacob Moverar led LA with 4 blocked shots. Tanner Jeannot and Joel Edmondson each had 3 hits, tied for the team lead. Vladislav Gavrikov led the Kings in ice time, 21 minutes, 55 seconds, and Quentin Byfield was the Kings' best player in the faceoff circle, winning 6 and losing 5 faceoffs. By the way, for those of you that might be interested, former Kings forward Blake Lizotte played his first game back in LA after being signed by Pittsburgh in the offseason as a free agent. He had a quick acknowledgement on the scoreboard and gave the fans a little wave. He did not have any points in this game. 1 shot on goal in 14 minutes and 33 seconds. On the season, if you're curious, Blake Lizotte, a very respectable 8 goals with 12 points. He had a total of 7 goals in Los Angeles his last year with the Kings. So I asked the question at the top of the show, was this the worst loss of the season for the Kings? We will answer that next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. The Stanley Cup Final, the Super Bowl, the Olympics. The world's top athletes get to play in these top-level sporting events thanks to one thing, teamwork. And teamwork can also protect your financial legacy and your family's future. SelectQuote's licensed insurance agents are perfect teammates while shopping for customized, affordable life insurance. They can help you find the right policy to keep your financial legacy safe in your family's end zone. SelectQuote is one of America's leading insurance brokers with nearly 40 years of experience, helping over 2 million customers find over $700 billion in coverage since 1985. Other life insurance brokers offer impersonalized, one-size-fits-all policies that may cost you more and cover you less, while SelectQuote's licensed insurance agents work with you to tailor your life insurance policy for your individual needs in as little as 15 minutes. Get the right life insurance for you for less at selectquote.com/lockedonnhl. Go to selectquote.com/lockedonnhl today to get started. That's selectquote.com/lockedonnhl. All right, so quick story time with Uncle Eddie. I was at the game against the Penguins as a fan. I don't get to go to too many games as a fan, maybe 5 or 6 on a good year. Most of the time, I'm one of those media slugs up in the press box. So when I do get to go to a game as a fan, it's kind of a treat for me. And I have a special young friend who was a fan of the radio show I used to work on. And he, for whatever reason, decided that I was kind of his favorite guy. And he's also a Penguins fan. And he had been asking me to take him to a Kings Penguins game. And I finally said, okay. So he had a great time. In the grand scheme of things, that's great. I put on a happy face, but on the inside, I was quite grumpy. So that experience may have tainted my feelings on this game as it being maybe the worst game of the season for the LA Kings. And also, more than that, the Kings' first game back after the fires. The organization had a great pregame ceremony. They honored the firefighters before the game, throughout the game, and it was great. And for the team to kind of not show up for that game also was a pretty big bummer, to be honest. And the Kings have been so good at home, and David Riddick has been so good at home. All in all, a really bad game for the Kings, but was it the worst game of the season? Well, let's take a quick look back at what I think are the worst games of the season so far. The Kings, fortunately, there haven't been a lot of them, as Jim Hiller said. He had 5 games on his list. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we're pretty close there. Let's start October 14th, just the third game of the season. That 8-7 overtime loss in Ottawa against the Senators. Now, allowing 8 goals is obviously bad, but the Kings did score 7, and at least they got a point out of that one. So I'm not going to say that was the worst loss of the year. October 22nd, 6-1 loss in Vegas. That was pretty ugly, but at least Vegas has been one of the top teams in the NHL for most of the season. November 2nd, a 4-3 shootout loss at home to Chicago. The Kings allowed the tying goal with 31 seconds left, then lost in overtime to one of the worst teams in the league. But then again, at least that game was close, and the Kings did get a point out of it. November 20th, a 1-0 home loss to Buffalo. Again, at least it was a competitive, close game. Getting shut out by Buffalo is pretty bad, but again, it wasn't a blowout loss. November 25th, 7-2 loss in San Jose, complete collapse in the third period, allowing 5 goals to one of the worst teams in the league. That was definitely the worst road loss of the season. And then we come to last night, January 20th, 5-1 home loss to the Penguins. I would still have to say, I think that Sharks game was probably worse. The Penguins aren't a terrible team, but I do think this was the worst home loss of the season and probably the second worst loss of the year to the Sharks loss in San Jose. Couple of bad losses to bad teams, and Pittsburgh isn't a terrible team, but the Kings were never in this game, never. And you can't say that really in all those other games, maybe except for the Vegas game. And again, Vegas is really good. So this was right there. This was right there as one of the worst losses of the season for sure for the Kings. I would say second worst of the season, but worst home loss of the season. So the Kings up next have the defending Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers on Wednesday, and then it's back out for another 5-game road trip against some really tough opponents. It starts on the road Saturday in Columbus against a rejuvenated Blue Jackets team that is currently one of the surprise teams in the NHL. They are a wild card team right now in the East. Then you got Detroit on Monday against the Red Wings team that's been playing a lot better under former Kings head coach Todd McClellan. Then back-to-back games against Eastern Powers, Florida and Tampa Bay. That's on Wednesday and Thursday. And then they wrap it up with a tough road game in Carolina against the Hurricanes on Saturday. So next stretch of 6 games, maybe the toughest stretch of games in the entire season for the Kings. And it doesn't come at a great time as the Kings are not playing some great hockey right now. The offense is struggling. So LA needs to get it going in a hurry here, or else this could be a tough stretch, and we might be getting a little bit worried about the Kings if things don't turn around here pretty quickly. One quick note I did want to pass along. If you missed it, I know we had an emailer on our fan feedback show on Friday talking about the frustration over Edmonton Oilers players getting preferential treatment from referees and from the league. Well, if you missed it, Oilers superstar Connor McDavid was hit with a 3-game suspension by the NHL for his cross-check to the face of Vancouver's Connor Garland. Definitely deserved, but I would say refreshing to see the NHL do the right thing. They don't always do that. We didn't have time for this on Monday, so I didn't want to get it in real quick. We have a quick rain report. Unfortunately for the Kings AHL affiliate, also not playing very good of late. They're 0-4 since our last rain report. They lost back-to-back road games to the Abbotsford Canucks last week by scores of 6-3 and 5-2. They then were shut out at home by the Henderson Silver Knights 1-0 before falling in their last game to the Calgary Wranglers 5-4 in overtime. Reign will host the Wranglers again tonight. Then they'll have games on Friday in Bakersfield and Saturday at home against Coachella Valley. Ontario right now 21-13-2 for 43 points on the season. They are fourth in the Pacific Division. Kind of weird that when the Kings have been playing really well, the Reign seem to have been playing well, and kind of vice versa at this point. All right, for you everydayers, those of you that listen and watch Locked On LA Kings every day, Wednesday, we're going to hopefully have a special guest and also preview that big Kings-Panthers game coming up. Thursday, obviously, we'll recap that game. And then Friday, a big Kings fan feedback show. If you want to get an email in for the feedback show, it is lockedoneddie@gmail.com, EDDIE. You can always post your comments. If you're watching on YouTube in the comments section, we appreciate that. It helps the algorithm. Also, would love for you to stay interactive with the show on social media, X, Twitter, Instagram. We are at Locked On LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to you tomorrow. And as always, go Kings, go.